Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Hants East.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Yeah, I think the thing that raised it for Dr. Smith was he referred to reading something in the newspaper. Well, actually, I think when he was minister, so the time frame for that, was somewhat apparent. But the article or the story he read in the paper was about a young woman. I don't know if it's Antigonish or Pictou, that had her family. They took her home around Christmas time for her family to be around her. She was 33 and dying of cervical cancer. And he said in the picture was her and her little children. And he said he thought he was minister at the time, and he felt that this was a real failure with the system, that someone of her age, we would lose someone of her age with young children to cervical cancer, because it's something we should be able to easily prevent. I'm curious if this test would be something that a nurse practitioner would do in some of these clinics, or would that purely be a physician?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would think that would be something a nurse practitioner could do. I would have to check if that's part of the scope of practice, but it would seem to me it's not difficult. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think at this point, I'm going to say thank you to the minister. An opportunity may come back to me to ask some more questions if some arise. But I know for some of the most significant issues in my constituency you have addressed, and I'll be sure to bring them to you, on an ongoing basis if the need arises. And so I want to say thank you to you and your staff, and I'll give the rest of my time to my colleague, the member from Halifax Needham.
The member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much to my colleague. I have a few questions for the minister in the remaining time for our caucus, and maybe continuing on a little bit in the vein of talking about community health clinics. I know that the minister has said that the Romano money was about buying change in the healthcare system as much as trying to address and plug some of the holes in our traditional healthcare system. And certainly one of the things that this caucus has been strong proponents of are community healthcare centers. I myself have had the opportunity to work in a community healthcare center, the North End Clinic in my constituency, and believe very much in a model that makes use of quite a broad continuum of healthcare providers. We still, I think, in spite of the fact that we do have very small number of community health clinics, we haven't really explored the strengths of that model in terms of really building a broad healthcare team that goes beyond doctors and nurses and maybe the odd other healthcare profession to really expand and look at occupational therapists and physiotherapists, to look at dietitians and nutritionists, psychologists, maybe social workers in this context. So I want to ask what the department's plan is for the expansion of community health clinics. And I specifically would like to know what work is being done in the Yarmouth area, because I know that there was a working group looking at establishing a community health clinic in that area. Dr. Rippey from the department and myself were down one evening to speak with people in the Yarmouth community about their needs and helping them build, a foundation to establish a community health clinic.
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And part of the money and the planning for expansion of community clinics is coming through the money from the federal government from the Primary Care Transition Fund. This money was made available in 2000, but until last fall, it took the negotiations took until last fall before the money started to come through. Now, there's been money distributed just last month to each of the DHAs to do their consultation and planning for what they're doing in the area of primary care to make change. Now, they call it a transition fund. The fund is not supposed to provide the operational money to operate a clinic necessarily, but it is there to help plan the change. And so that is going to be the springboard for more of these kinds of clinics across the province. It's the $17 million is being distributed over 4 years. So first the DHAs work through their planning stage, and then as they complete that, next year they can access more money. Now some change can be achieved without more operational money. Sometimes it just involves moving people who are existing people and services into a different setting. But the money can also be used, correct me if I'm wrong, but for physical renovations of a space that might make it more convenient to have a community clinic. So it may seem slow, but it is steady. And that is what that federal money is meant for, and we've signed a contract with the federal government for that $17 million to be used in this way. And there will be an evaluation of that money and the whole project. In terms of the question about the group from Yarmouth, I'm not sure at this stage of any progress there, but I will find out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax, Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure that I heard the number correct. If it was 70 million, 17 million. That's what I thought, 17 million over 4 years. I'm wondering if the minister can say what would happen in a situation like, for example, the North End Clinic, where there already is a community clinic. And I know that the North End Clinic has struggled with a growing demand for their services, with both minimal funds for operating and minimal space. I mean, they have a real serious space problem. They were one of the locations for the primary healthcare project, and that has continued on. And they fairly recently, in the last 3 years, I guess, the Metropolitan Immigrant Settlement Association, for example, have moved on to Gottingen Street, and the North End Clinic has an agreement, a relationship with that clinic, and they're providing a lot of healthcare services to newcomers, for example. And I know from attending their annual general meeting and some strategic planning meetings that they've had, that space and the pressure for their services has grown, and they've had real difficulty finding resources to meet growing demand and inside a limited space. So for a center that's already established within a district authority, in this case the Central Region, would there be additional monies to help them address their situation?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we don't believe we received a proposal from the clinic for, under that plan, but certainly for something structural, I think that would be a candidate. Now that the funds are being given to the district, so it would be a matter of making an application to the district health authority for some funding from that transition fund, and again, not operational dollars, but it is primary health care transition. It fits with the wording and it fits with the intent. So, you know, I'm sure it would be a good candidate for a project if it means changing physical space, expanding physical space. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax, Needham.
That's very good to hear. I'll pass that along if they haven't already gotten that information so they can look at this. The other issue I'd like to raise around community health clinics is a framework that will help them preserve their autonomy on some level and their accountability to the community where they reside and to those that they provide services to. And what I mean by that is that, you know, using the North End Clinic again as an example, this is an organization that is probably getting close to 30 years old. And it's an organization that arose out of the community's need for healthcare services many years ago, and that need continues to be there. But in the 30 years that the North End Clinic has been there, they operate with a board of directors that they elect from the community, both of people who are people who use the community clinic, but also people who may represent different segments of the community. And the clinic has been a real leader, a real initiator of other services in the community. I can think of any number of other important standalone services in the North End that the North End Clinic fostered because the staff at the clinic would identify a need and they would do the research and they would do the work to get the seed funding to grow a new organization that would respond to that need. So, for example, the Parent Resource Center in Uniacke Square started as a program off the North End Clinic with young mothers with young children meeting at the North End Clinic with a nurse, probably 15 years or more ago, and identifying that they needed a parent resource center in the area for young women, young families with young children. The methadone clinic, really, I think the methadone program in the North End was recognized as a need by physicians and other staff at the clinic. The Creighton Garish housing, all of the housing work that's being done through the Metro nonprofit, a lot of that, the social worker, Paul O'Hara at the North End Clinic, had a lot to do with in terms of identifying the needs of street people and so on. So the North End Clinic historically has had the autonomy to hire its own staff, to monitor the needs of the community and respond to those needs in terms of growing new programs. And I know that in the community health clinic sector, and I would say that the methadone program would have the same sort of concerns. As funding is channeled to these organizations through the district authorities, these organizations still want to preserve their autonomy and be able to respond to the needs of the community and be accountable to the community as well as to the funding source, not just for dollars, but for actual programs. So there's always this bit of tension there around the governance of these organizations and how they preserve their autonomy in these situations. And I'm wondering if the Department of Health has developed guidelines for the district authorities to make clear what the lines of accountability are and in those guidelines, if there's been an effort to ensure that the autonomy and the self-determination on some level of these organizations is maintained.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I believe the answer is somewhere in between. We do have initial guidelines for these groups, and those guidelines recognize that it's very important that if a clinic is to be a community clinic, it has to have representation, whether it's a board of directors, an advisory board, or whatever, from the community. We don't want clinics to be absolutely standalone because we want to be able to have some kind of a sensible array of services available in the area. However, they won't work without advisory boards and members of the community. So now the Health Authorities Act gives operation of health services to the DHAs, but the guidelines that we're working on would attempt to get at how this actually works, because we don't want the North End Clinic or any other clinic that may arise to lose its community flavor and to lose its roots and just be, administered from inside the QE2 somewhere or whatever. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The NDP caucus and member for Halifax Needham has about 1 minute left.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I guess the last point I want to make is there is a concern about the emergency, the walk-in clinics, the lack of continuity between patients and physicians. You walk in, you never know who you're going to see, and whether or not that model, in fact, is not a model that conforms to the idea of primary health care, where you can develop a relationship, where you can, have healthcare providers that know the whole picture and are able to respond to the real needs, rather than a model that sort of just continues on, this one-off kind of intervention.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that is a weakness of that system, and other provinces that have a lot of them, they find exactly the same thing. It doesn't mean you couldn't have it does serve some purposes because a person is going to get seen, but one would think that it's gone a little too far the other way. Certainly you go into some doctors' offices where they have family practice, you might see another doctor instead of your own physician in an emergency, but you still have your own physician. So, there's work to be done there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll shift to the Liberal caucus. The Honourable the member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be very succinct and less convoluted than the previous questioner on the series of law balls that seem to be going back and forth across the floor.
Did she ask any questions?
The last 2 days that I asked the minister questions, it was with regards to the air ambulance system. I asked for if the minister could inform members of the committee as to the increased cost in the air ambulance system, because when the department took over from the private sector, I wanted the bottom line. What's the cost of the system since the government took over, as opposed to, let's say, the last year when the private sector was operating it?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, staff are still working on that and will supply the answer to that question. But, the member recognized it wasn't a year-to-year question, and there are a lot of figures to go through. but I have undertaken to supply that information to the House, and I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Cape Breton West member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be honest, I'm a little disappointed because it's something that the department officials had boasted about last year going into budgets, that this was going to be a big saving for the department. The minister has already indicated that the costs are over and above what it was when it was in the hands of the private contractor. And this is the third day that I've asked it. I mean, do we have any sense at all, other than saying that staff are working on it? I know the minister wouldn't be doing this, but I'm wondering if somebody in the department is deliberately delaying this information. I think this is a very important issue because this is an excellent, it's probably one of the best services operated anywhere in North America. But if we're talking about getting value for dollar, the staff were very dogged in their determination to take over operation of this particular service. And I think, in all fairness, we deserve an answer before we're finished with the minister on this particular estimate.
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I say, the year-over-year costs are in the estimates. And I did supply an answer yesterday that was not satisfactory to the member who asked a number of other questions. And staff are working on those other questions. But I did mention that in '01, we did save $160,000 in STARS management fees. But we've had increased costs since then, which include wage settlements, 100 additional emissions, insurance cost increases, and fuel price increases. But the member from Cape Breton West had asked for a great many details, and staff are working on that now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is as I understand, there's a particular division within the Department of Health that deals specifically with this. There's a manager that oversees this particular operation. I would think it would be very simple for that individual, I forget what her name is, who is in charge of this particular program, that she could have provided this information. And I find it very difficult to accept that the department, maybe the minister is not aware of this, but I can't accept the fact that the department doesn't have this information. But the minister has said that, so we'll have to go with that for the time being. Looking at the insurance cost, how much more are we paying in insurance this year than we did last year?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm told that is embedded in our Canadian helicopter contract, and again, that is information that we will have to get for the member. It is not broken out on a separate budget line here, but we can get that. That was one of the questions that was asked. Given the number of questions asked, what staff are trying to do is to take information that is in a bunch of different places and put them on one piece of paper the way the member asked, and that is why it's taking some time to get the information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Cape Breton West member.
Well, can the minister tell us what the total cost of fuel was for the air ambulance system last year?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you. The answer to that question is $279,000. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Cape Breton West member.
The insurance costs are embedded in the contract, I believe the minister indicated. What was the total value of the contract that the minister refers to?
The Minister of Health.
For the upcoming year, that is almost $2.4 million, $2.379 million. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
What was the value of the contract last year?
The Honorable the Minister of Health.
$1.983. $1,983,400. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
I think we're getting a little closer. It looks like, assuming that the fuel cost would be relatively the same, let's say $100,000 higher this year than last year, we're looking at, and taking in the difference in the contracts, it looks like the cost of the contract has increased by, the cost of the service has increased by approximately $700,000. Am I in the ballpark?
The Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I mean, you know, it has increased over last year. The issue that we're trying to get at, I thought the member was trying to get at, was previous years as well. But from year to year, we certainly have the answers to his questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Cape Breton West member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point specific, as I've said before, I wanted to find out and to do a comparative analysis, because when this was transferred over into the government's hands, the argument was made by the minister of the day and staff that it was going to save the department money. And we're not seeing that. It doesn't seem to be the case. So, and there was considerable evidence at that time to argue against that particular almost unilateral action against the contractor who was operating, and it was quite successful. Not only because it was a cheaper contract, but because this particular company was able to go out and secure endowments from large corporations across Canada to be able to reduce the cost of this service. Now that's gone. Those type of contributions, they've evaporated. They're gone. The departmental costs are higher than what the minister said it was going to be, notwithstanding the fact that there's an increased cost for the maintenance of these various pads. You know, there was a lot of volunteerism that was into that. That's now gone. So we could be looking upwards anywhere from a 50 to a 75% increase in the cost of the air ambulance system. And they're just rough figures. I'm just curious as to whether the minister has had an opportunity to be briefed by her staff on this particular issue, because $1 million to $1.5 million is a lot of money. It's a lot of money that could have been saved had the minister of the day and the staff listened to the experts in the industry, and that wasn't the case. Is the minister, or has the minister had any discussions with staff because of this rather unusual increase in the cost of the air ambulance service, which could have very well have been avoided?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, we do have wage settlements in sectors over time that increase costs. And we have insurance increases. Obviously, the fuel price increase the member has recognized would take place anyway. And the service has flown 100 additional missions. These all do add to costs. The department still feels that that it was the right thing to do to take over the service. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple other topics I'm going to focus on, but just before I go to that, I can't left it unsaid. The minister already has indicated that she doesn't know whether the insurance costs are up or down, because she said it's built into the contract, and she doesn't know the breakdown of the contract. So we can't say if the insurance fees are up or down if you don't know the detail of the contract, and the minister has already indicated that. And as far as the additional trips, perhaps we'll focus on that. How many trips were made altogether in the last year?
The Honorable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to correct a previous statement. I did not say that the insurance cost had not gone up. In fact, it has gone up. The member asked how much it has gone up by, and I said I would get back to him because that's embedded in the contract, but I was quite clear that the insurance cost had gone up. The number of flights flown was 600. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Cape Breton West member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the average cost of a trip?
The Minister of Health.
About $7,500, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
The Cape Breton West member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to the other issue I believe I raised with the minister yesterday, and that's the waiting list. I know she's indicated that the waiting list for acute care, well, maybe no, we didn't. That's the other issue, the number of beds. But the waiting list, there was some debate as to whether waiting lists are up or down at the hospitals, and the minister wasn't able to give me some detail on that at that point. Has she been able to ascertain any figures on the waiting time for individuals going into hospitals?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I wasn't clear yesterday, Mr. Chair, but there's no such thing as a wait list per se. You have to talk about wait lists for specific procedures, specific treatments. You have to break them down into, wait lists for MRIs, wait list for CAT scans. There's no general wait list that encompasses every single procedure in the system. There isn't such a thing anywhere in the country or the world. You have to break them down into what the wait lists are for. And that is precisely the thing that one section of our department is spending all its time on, trying to make sure that before we get into compiling provincial wait lists for other procedures, because we do have them for nursing homes now, and so that we know that we're comparing apples and oranges when we say the wait list for CAT scan in Sydney is, so many weeks or months, that we're talking about exactly the same thing in Halifax or whatever. And then that information, when we know we're working from the same standards, gets put into a provincial system. And once it's province-wide, you're much better able to advise patients to go to a particular hospital or clinic for a certain procedure. And it may not be the one they want to go to, but it may be you know, a better one for them. I mean, even in emergency wards, the emergency wards across the province don't necessarily measure their wait times the same way. Some may measure from the time you come in the door till the time you see a physician. Some may measure from the time you're triaged to the time you see a physician. And what we have to do, and this is a big people enterprise, is get the standards the same so that we know that when we're putting out wait list times, they're accurate. I mean, right now for some procedures, for example, some specialists have their own wait lists. So a patient may be told, you can't have a CAT scan, or I'm trying to think of another procedure.
Mostly operative
For
procedures that the doctors
you know, an
do
operative
themselves.
procedure, you can't do it for 6 months. But what they're referring to is you can't have it done by that particular doctor for 6 months. They aren't necessarily referring to a hospital wait list. So I know the member from Cape Breton West may think that I'm trying to keep figures from him. That is not the case. It's just that the question that he asked has a very, very complex answer that we don't know all the answers to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to refer to an article, a recent article, well, not too recent, 2002. It was done by the Fraser Institute, so a bit of a right-wing think tank. It's entitled Critical Issues, Waiting Your Turn. And it's essentially an evaluation of health services in every provincial jurisdiction and territories and nationally. And one of the issues that I found rather interesting was that for Nova Scotia, in terms of waiting times, actual versus reasonable waits between appointment with specialists and treatment, from the period of 1998, or 1999 actually, about halfway in between, it went from approximately 6 days up to, 6 weeks up to 9.4 weeks, which seems to be a rather significant increase in time. Now, I do have to apologize. I'll go back to the first page to find out if that's days or weeks. But anyway, I think it's weeks. Weeks. But that seems to be a rather significant increase in time that someone has to wait to get to see a specialist. Is the minister aware of that? And what action has the minister taken to mitigate that increased waiting time for a patient to be able to go to see from their practitioner to the specialist?
Just before I recognize the minister, I wonder if the member for Cape Breton West would perhaps have a photocopy of that page that he referred to from the Fraser Institute. Some may want to peruse it a little bit. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly would like to have a look at that. And also, I'd like to find out where they got the particular information. It's because depending upon the disease and depending upon the specialist, that might or might not be a significant increase. Certainly, my own experience and that of friends is that you can wait to see a specialist anywhere from a month to 6 months to a year, depending upon how many, what the condition is, who the specialist is, and where he or she is located. So, without access to that information, I'm afraid I'm not able to answer the question of whether it's a significant increase or not. It could be, but it might not be as well. because I don't know the details. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And yes, the member did indicate he would provide us with a photocopy of at least the page from the Fraser Institute. And I might just say, with all respect, it seems a bit ironic that the Liberal member for Cape Breton West would be providing the government with a page relevant to the topic and out of the Fraser Institute. And we certainly appreciate his generosity.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would hope that the minister and the government would be equally as kind to have this waiting list reduced so that patients could be able to see their specialist in a timely fashion. I mean, I have no problems perusing and reviewing right-wing think tank data, even if it fits in with the neoconservative dogma that sometimes comes from across the floor from the government. I'd be only too pleased to provide the government with some of its own information. On this, in this particular issue as well, there's a lot of fascinating stuff here. And I'm going to point out a few other sets of statistics, and then I'll pass the book over to the minister, and then I'll get to the focus of really where I want to go with this issue. On page 62 of this particular edition from it's 2002, so I'm not sure what date exactly. But anyway, for Nova Scotia, the estimated, according to Table 14, estimated number of procedures for which patients are waiting after appointment with specialists. Nova Scotia, for like gynecology, has one of the highest per capita in the country, which I thought was a little concerning. For general surgery, I'll read out the figures. For British Columbia, for procedures per 100,000, in British Columbia it's 304, Alberta 226, Saskatchewan 729, Manitoba 226, Ontario 210, Quebec 311, New Brunswick 184, Nova Scotia 236, and then so on. But when you figure out on a per capita basis, that's fairly high. I asked the minister about her information systems yesterday. About, for example, I think my question was with regards to the waiting times at the outpatient units of different hospitals across the province. The minister indicated that she wasn't able to provide that information. I would think that it wouldn't be all that difficult to check with the regional hospital authorities or the community hospital boards. I keep changing the names around and the structure so much it's hard to follow. But it would appear to me that it wouldn't be that difficult to find out how long a patient would have to wait on average, let's say at the QE2, as opposed to the Colchester Regional or a hospital in the Glasgow or the Cape Breton Regional or whatever. Is the minister telling us that they just don't have that data whatsoever to be able to give some indication to members of the committee whether access to health care is getting better or the waiting times are getting longer, especially at outpatients?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd just like to clarify if the member, when he says outpatients, means emergency wards. That was one of the questions that was asked yesterday, and we are getting that information. It's not information that we have at the department, but the district health authorities do have that information for all the hospitals, and that's what we've asked them to collect. Bearing in mind that they may not measure wait times exactly the same way, but we can get the information. And I would add, I've said it before, but I would add again that if someone sees you and judges that your condition is far less critical than other ones in the room, you may have a wait time of 5 to 6 hours, but that is judged as a reasonable wait time in context with the other injuries or illnesses that the emergency ward may be dealing with on any given day. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Cape Breton West MLA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The minister, I'm going to shift the focus just slightly, but it's on information systems in a different fashion. The minister indicated that the department has a waiting list for seniors going into nursing homes. Would the minister give us the figure as to how many seniors are on the waiting list province-wide waiting to go into nursing homes?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have that with us, but we can get that very quickly. We can get that this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps the minister would also apprise members of the committee as to how many seniors are presently in hospitals awaiting to go into nursing homes as well. And with that information, what's the, well, you can give me an actual figure, or you can just give me an average figure, the approximate time that they stay in the hospital while they're waiting to get into a nursing home. Is it on average 25 days, a month, 2 months, or what have you?
The Minister of Health.
On average, it is a couple of months on average, a wait between being medically discharged and going into a nursing home. It may not always be a couple of months, but that would probably be the average. And meanwhile, we will get also the information on the numbers of seniors in beds awaiting placement in nursing homes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Cape Breton West MLA.
How much do the seniors have to pay while they stay in the hospital waiting to go into a nursing home?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that rate is about $50 a day. $50 a day. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Does it ever go higher?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair. It goes up if the patient refuses a placement in a nursing home. Then it goes up to about $200 a day, I believe is the figure.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Do we have many cases of seniors that don't want to go to the nursing home, that would rather stay in the hospital? I know myself, I've had at least one case in the last year where a patient, he was a terminal patient, and well, when he first went into the hospital, I believe before the first week was over, the staff from the Department of Health had rushed in and insisted that his wife fill all the papers out to start the process to have him centered into a nursing home. Now, lo and behold, I think he was in the hospital for almost 11 months for a whole variety of health reasons. and he eventually died in the hospital. But the Department of Health went to great pains to try and have him transferred into the nursing home, despite the fact that his health didn't warrant going into a nursing home. So, are there many cases that are in dispute now within the department that are similar in nature to what I've just described?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, Mr. Chair, there are very few cases like that. I mean, obviously, the earlier the assessment process is started, the less weight there may be. It's also a case where it could be hospital staff rather than the Department of Health. There aren't so many Department of Health people, running around the countryside, performing those duties. But regardless, it certainly is easier and quicker to get into a nursing home if both the care assessment and financial assessment are done earlier rather than later.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Well, I'm going to take a moment to focus on that because it seems like the left arm and the right arm within the department don't seem to know what they're doing. And I believe when the minister was first appointed to that department, I think she referred to the frustration. I think she reflected the frustration by many people across Nova Scotia with the way the Department of Health officials were handling that. And I believe she used the term Gestapo-like tactics. Well, now she is the well, that was the quote in the paper, Mr. Chair, and I believe the minister would concur that. But I always was told. It was something my dad told me one time. He said, no matter what you do in life, he said, at the end of the day, he said, you're the captain of your ship. If it sails, you sail. If it sinks, you sink too. So the minister is now captain of the ship. What specific action has she taken to dispose of those Gestapo-like tactics out of the department?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for clarification, I did say department staff were looking like Gestapo. I didn't say they were using Gestapo-like tactics. It may seem a fine distinction, but it is a distinction. Mr. Chair, we've changed our processes considerably, and we continue to meet to refine those processes. We consulted with the group of 9. We've had meetings with the Fire Marshal's office, people in my department and the Fire Marshal's office, and community services to try to work out more, and succeeding actually, in working out more humane ways to deal with situations in which elderly people had been moved abruptly from one location to another. We have also taken great pains to begin involving the families right at the beginning, instead of dealing primarily with either the boarding home or small options home, whatever you choose to call them, the operators, who themselves are in a difficult situation sometimes. There are situations where they know they can't care properly for people, but the hospital sends them back and the elderly person has nowhere to go. But the operator of the establishment, may know very well they're not equipped to deal with the needs of that person. So we do not have a perfect system by any means, but the specific actions that we've taken are beginning to work, and we will continue in that vein to try to make sure that if a person has to be moved, it is done in the gentlest most humane way possible, and that the family is aware of all the options. And, you know, given the problems that can result when elderly people are moved, even under the best of circumstances, we feel this is a better way to proceed. It does not mean that we're going to be ignoring fire marshal recommendations or trying to endanger seniors. That's obviously not what our object is. But our object is to try to deal with people more compassionately. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sense a little backpedaling on behalf of the minister there. She's now saying it was a perceived Gestapo-like tactic as opposed to a real. And we have to be very careful, because the message that was sent out to the people of Nova Scotia, at least I think that's what the minister was trying to convey, was that staff in the department were using Gestapo-like tactics, and she was going to stop that. But now she's saying it was only a perception. It was only a perception. And when she get in there, then she found that that's all it was just a perception, and they made some housekeeping changes. But she made reference to the fire marshal's office, and I have to say, personally, Mr. Chairman, I'm suspect, because it seems like when one government department wants some dirty work done, it will call the fire marshal's office. I've seen that happen with the Department of Education. I've seen that happen in this department. And that's not to diminish in any way, shape, or form the importance of fire safety and protecting seniors. Look, I was a minister of labor that was responsible for that. I know the importance of it. And the staff, I could never give them enough credit for all the good work they do. But it seems to me like any time the government wants to achieve a certain objective, well, let's call in the fire marshal's office. And that sends up a red flag, and everybody goes and hides for cover and uses the fire marshal's office as a smokescreen to achieve whatever they really want to achieve. Maybe it's a way to really centralize these nursing home services. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just, quote, a perception. You know, maybe they like to warehouse seniors, you know, in these large commercial type institutions. Maybe that's just a perception. But the minister knows full well, she's an expert at public relations, and she knows very well how to use the right punch words to get the message across. And my concern is, with regards to the fire marshal's office, point specific, how many calls have been made by the Department of Health to the fire marshal's office in the last year to investigate issues such as what's been occurring in the last few months, or altogether for that matter?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I don't have the answer to that question, and I have no way of finding the answer to that question, and I think the member opposite knows that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Mr. Chairman, I find that totally unacceptable. The Department of Health have called in the fire marshal on different occasions. And now the minister is standing here today and saying she doesn't know how many times he's been contacted. She's, as I've said before, you're the captain of the ship. The buck stops at the top. You have to know how many times your officials are calling the fire marshal's office with what are supposed to be legitimate complaints. Certainly, there has to be some record of how many times the Department of Health have contacted the fire marshal's office, you know, to show some validity to the concerns by the Department of Health vis-a-vis the concerns that are being expressed by by the operators of these small nursing homes in rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
And there were 5 or 6 of them.
Mr. Chair, if someone in the department called the fire marshal's office about a complaint about a particular location, that call would be noted and logged. And in that case, we're talking 5 or 6 calls last year. But we work with the fire marshal's office on a number of issues, and staff are calling the fire marshal's office regularly on a lot of matters where the calls would not be logged, and that's what I'm referring to. Every single call to the fire marshal's office, that would not be an attainable figure because there is such regular communication. If he's talking about specific complaints about some of the unlicensed homes, then the answer would be 5 or 6, and I can get back to him whether it was 5 or 6. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Of the 5 or 6 that have been contacted by the Department of Health, how many have been shut down?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
To my knowledge, Mr. Chair, none have been shut down. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
What issues were resolved to make it such that they weren't shut down? Or what was it that precipitated the Department of Health to call the fire marshal's office?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, there are a number of issues here, but we will only call the fire marshal's office if we receive a complaint. And sometimes it is a complaint from a family member, sometimes it's a complaint from a neighbor, occasionally it's a complaint from a competitor. And the issue that the department is interested in is essentially the mobility of the seniors, the ability of the senior to get out in the event of a fire. There was a recent incident where it wasn't a mobility issue, but it was an understanding issue because the gentleman...
Please. Order. There are some conversations that are taking place in the chamber that are out loud conversations. And I guess the chair wouldn't mind if there were some whispered conversations, but the chair would prefer if no conversations other than the one between the members is taking place at this moment. So I would appreciate it if the members would take their conversations outside of the chamber. The Honourable Minister of Health has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so that's our concern, and that has to do with the level of care that may be appropriate for that person. And if the person, is bedridden and can't move, it's a real issue for us because we know that person would not be able to get out in the event of a fire. But the fire marshal doesn't make that decision. That decision is made upon based upon an assessment made by a care coordinator with doing an assessment on the senior. But the other issue, which is obviously not undertaken by the health department, are inspections of nursing homes, boarding homes, small options homes, which occur all the time, regularly, as part of the job of the fire marshal's office, as the member would know. And these inspections take place unannounced, and various aspects of the home or nursing home, whether it's a large institution or a very small home, are looked at. And usually, well, perhaps not usually, but at any time, the fire marshal official may order certain remedial action to be taken in the homes, whether it's a certain kind of, whether doors open the right way, whether the fire alarms are in the right place, the size of the stairways, the width of the doorways, and in the bigger homes, whether or not the sprinkler systems work, and so on, and whether the fire doors are kept closed. All these things are things that he would look for, and if he or perhaps she finds that something needs to be changed structurally, then orders will be given for those things to be accomplished within a certain period of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very helpful information, but didn't answer the question that I asked. But so we'll just move on to the next issue. If you would be kind enough to pass that over to the minister. On page 64 of that same report, I just sent a copy over to the minister. I noticed the table 15. It does a comparison of estimated number of procedures for which patients are waiting after appointment with specialists, and they did a comparative analysis between 2 years ago and last year. And for plastic surgery in Nova Scotia, there was a 59% increase in waiting time or in patient backlog. There was a 27% increase in that backlog on the issue of gynecology. And there was a 54% increase for, and I can't even pronounce the word, to be honest. I'd have to get a doctor to pronounce that word. Ophthalmology, I believe it is. And then there was several other issues. But one that seems to really catch my attention is on the issue of general surgery. There seems to be a growing concern there, a 20% increase. Now that to me is a very telling issue. Has that been the case in the last fiscal year, 2002, 2003? Has there been additional increase? Has that trend continued in that direction, or has it reversed?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'd have to go back and get that to see look at those numbers to see whether general, wait lists for general surgery, are going up or going down. I do know that in the health authorities that they have been reorganizing their operating rooms and their operating room times, and it may have made a difference. But I should also point out that general surgery is one of the areas that will become probably more difficult as time goes on, as fewer and fewer medical students wish to go into general surgery. And that is going to be a real issue and actually is starting to be felt right across the country. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only is general surgery, the backlog is growing there, but on neurosurgery, there's a 52% increase there. Orthopedic surgery, there's a 60% increase there. With cardiovascular, it went down 22%. As with urology, but internal medicine went up 28%, radiation oncology 91%. I can't see how the minister can say that health care in Nova Scotia is getting better. Maybe the quality of service when a person receives it is getting better, but access to health care is not getting better. And these numbers speak to that. So I would ask the minister if she could quantify some, or give some explanation as to how her words don't seem to match with the evidence that's here before us.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, healthcare in our systems are being stabilized. We are getting better information. And we have to prioritize, as everybody does. Where we have identified problems and been able to measure them properly, we have been able to reduce wait times. But two of the issues that we're going to be tackling next are the areas of oncology and orthopedic surgery. I know the member opposite understands this, but and it's very frustrating for the people waiting for orthopedics in particular. It's no less frustrating for people waiting for oncology. It's just that there are fewer of them. So, but the advances in orthopedic surgery and the abilities of the surgeons to replace hips and replace knees and so on is so good that the demand is higher. And when you have that kind of service, your wait list gets bigger the better you get at it. And there's at least one surgeon, for example, at the QE2 that has a clinic down in Lunenburg. So he can do his orthopedic surgery down in Lunenburg and not have to postpone them patients in Halifax. And that's one way of helping patients there. But again, what we have to look at with that kind of surgery is perhaps increased use of the operating rooms, and that is certainly possible. But it's something that we have to talk a lot with the people at the QE2 and the District Health Authority. We do have an additional neurosurgeon coming to the QE2, which should reduce the wait list there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to belabor the point too much, other than to make it the point. The evidence that's here in this report points quite clearly that we're getting a buildup. It's like water building up a dam on a dam, and the pressure is building, and sooner or later it's going to let go. We're not able to keep up with the demand for health service, particularly for radiation oncology. Now we're talking cancer. People should not have to wait a longer period of time for treatment for cancer. You get that done ASAP, because every day is that much worse for the patient. And I know that's every member in this legislature can relate to it. I know that. So this is serious stuff. And we can come in and we can do our political thing in here and make our statements and so on. But things are not getting better. And the evidence points to it. And that's the issue I wanted to make. There are some areas where things are getting better. I know that because of information and science technology and improved systems and so on. I'm not an expert in medicine. Know very little about it, other than say, well, I can get some Tylenol or go get a prescription from a doctor for a certain ailment or something. But I'm afraid if what these experts are saying are correct, things are not getting better. They're getting worse. And perhaps the minister could give us the figures for the last the fiscal year we're just finishing, to do a comparative analysis to those. But also, I wanted to raise another issue. Today it was reported in the local media in industrial Cape Breton that parking fees for the hospitals in Cape Breton are increasing by 100%. They're going from $1 to $2 effective the beginning of this fiscal year, or could be today. Oh, I'm sorry, April 28th, effective April 28th. Was the minister aware of this? And, you know, does she have any idea the impact that this is going to have? Is this going to be part of their operating budget? And is this just confined to the Cape Breton health complexes?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we were aware of this. Again, the fee is not mandated by the department. Each district makes its own decision on parking fees. And as I've said on previous occasions, the waivers can be obtained by persons in need if they wish to do so. Mr. Chair, earlier the member asked a question about seniors on waiting lists, and I wonder if I might answer that question now. There are 108 seniors fully eligible in communities. Fully eligible means that the assessments have all been done. In communities waiting for placement, and in hospitals there are 35 fully eligible patients waiting for placement in nursing homes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realize the decision on parking fees is at the hospital level. But what the minister is saying to these hospital boards is, we're only going to give you so much, the rest you go and get somewhere else. And the cost of operating health care in Cape Breton is now going to be done through parking fees. Is Cape Breton the only area where that the minister knows that these parking fees will be increasing? Are there other areas of the province where parking fees will increase?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Increasing, but there was.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I haven't been told of any others increasing this year, but I do know that some other areas already had the parking charge was already at $2.
Oh, sorry, Cumberland's increasing.
Cumberland is increasing also. Now, I believe the announcement that the rate would be going up was actually made last year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Order, please. The member's time has expired. The chair recognizes the member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in the main estimates book on page 12.33 is a figure of $30 million for grants and contributions for infrastructure. Well, that's kind of a high level, so I thought I'd look in the supplementary detail for more information on page 12.21, and it says under hospital infrastructure $30 million. Okay, so there's not one line of extra detail in supplementary estimates. Sometimes I wonder, Mr. Chairman, why in fact we have the supplementary estimates, because so much of what's in here is simply repeating what's in the main book, and there's not actually any supplementary detail. And so my first question today is to ask for the minister in detail, and preferably in writing, how exactly that $30 million breaks down and how it's going to be allocated. The minister may choose to answer that question verbally if she wishes, but I expect the list of capital grants is long enough that perhaps if she were to table the breakdown, it would be much more enlightening to all members of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I can give the member opposite a list of the projects in general. We know the amount that we have for capital grants. We know the demands we have for capital, and so we have prioritized these, and we do have a list of projects. but we don't have the amounts. We have not broken down the amounts ourselves. So I will say that, but included in that number for the $30 million will be the Yarmouth Hospital Phase 2, planning for Colchester, some renovations for the IWK Grace, construction money for the Cobequid Multi-Service Center, study for the Valley Regional. There will be also work done at the Dartmouth General. This is the dialysis unit. The dialysis unit in the Cape Breton Health Authority, and various small infrastructure projects. But at this time, the department has not allocated all the funding exactly to many of the projects. But those are the areas that will be receiving capital money this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Just to make sure that I understand, Minister, are you saying that the budgetary envelope, as it were, is $30 million, and not all of that $30 million has been allocated at this point? Is that a correct understanding?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
That's essentially right, Mr. Chair. We are prioritizing the projects. There are some small projects that we may yet consider. Obviously, the demand is greater than the supply in terms of what we're doing, but there are some things we know we absolutely have to do. But that will be coming. That information will be coming. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Chairman, will the minister table a list of the approved projects and the amount associated with each project?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, I will do that when we have it. I did explain that the districts have not yet been told the exact amounts that are going to their project. And when we have determined that, I definitely will table a list of the projects and the exact amount going to each. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Okay, now I just want to make sure I understand this again. The minister is telling us, if I understand her correctly, that not only can she not give us the list, but the district health authorities haven't themselves been told what's been approved, and yet the legislature is being asked to approve an allocation of $30 million. There seems to be a disconnect here with what we're being asked to approve and what's actually happening out there in the real world. I'm not sure that I see the logic of doing it quite that way. Nevertheless, with specific reference to the Capital District Health Authority, has funding been approved for renovations, major or otherwise, to the Nova Scotia Hospital and or the Dartmouth General Hospital to be funded out of this $30 million?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, in terms of a Dartmouth General, funding for their dialysis unit will come out of this allocation. I know the member opposite knows this, but for the point of view, for the information of other members, most of these projects are multi-year projects. Not all, but most of them are. And, continuation, some from last year and the year before, and there'll be more work done next year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Does the $30 million include approval for renovations to provide for a mental health inpatient unit at the Nova Scotia Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Neither official here with me today has seen that request, so that is not on the list, to be direct. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would now like to talk to a different topic entirely, and a topic that is dear to my heart and has been for some time. That's the topic of ambulance fees. Mr. Chairman, just to start us off, just to get us started on this topic, on which I intend to take the next little while, I wonder if the Minister could let the House know how much revenue is expected to be taken in from ambulance fees this year as opposed to last year.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
This year, our share would be $6.9 million in ambulance fee recoveries.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
That's interesting, but not entirely my question. How much money is being taken from Nova Scotians in ambulance fees in total this year? And this is also an important part of the question, as compared to last year.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
This year and last year, the amount expected to be recovered is the same. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to ask any more of those questions because the answers are taking a surprisingly long amount of time, and I only have so much time to get into this topic. The Minister will be aware that starting early last year, over a year ago, I started raising the topic of unfair ambulance fees in Nova Scotia. And for a whole list of reasons, the fees as they operate on the ground in the real world can be unfair. And I raised this issue repeatedly with the former Minister of Health. And to say that I got no satisfaction would be understating it or overstating it, Mr. Chairman, because that minister seemed to be intent on misrepresenting the issues that I was raising, on refusing to do anything about it, refusing even to acknowledge that there was a problem. And what the minister said was that, oh, you're saying this, oh, you're saying that. And of course, these things, these misrepresentations about what I was saying had nothing to do with the on-the-ground reality, but the net result of it all is that more than a year later, absolutely nothing has changed. So now that we have a new Minister of Health, I have renewed hope that somebody in the Department of Health is going to acknowledge that we have a problem. And before the Minister reads the same briefing notes which the former Minister had, and let me hope the briefing notes have been changed since then. I really hope they have. Let me say what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that we should do away with ambulance fees. We need ambulance fees. That's okay. I'm not saying ambulance fees are too high. In most cases, ambulance fees are fair and reasonable. What I am saying is that the policy operates in such a way that in some circumstances, it can be dreadfully unfair. And the person on whom the burden falls is not the person on whom the burden ought to fall. So I'm even not talking about giving away any provincial revenue. I'm just talking about putting the burden of ambulance fees where it belongs, and not on Nova Scotia families who can't afford these fees when they work their magic of unfairness. So I'm not going to ask the Minister about individual cases. It's not fair. I know she can't answer on individual cases, and it's not fair to raise them, but I am going to ask about policy aspects. When 2 or 3 people get into the same ambulance, each one of them gets a bill, so that the province's take is much, much more than the cost of service. Why is that fair, and what is the minister going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the simple answer to that question is we believe the policy is fair because the costs charged per trip are based on average costs of the whole system. So, and the cost of the personnel as well. So if two people, for example, are in an ambulance and they're both being treated, they will both get a bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
But you see, the problem is that the costs are calculated per patient, whereas the actual costs are per trip. If you have one ambulance making one trip, then the fixed costs of the ambulance are the same, the fuel costs are the same, the costs of the personnel are the same. In fact, there is no additional cost except, marginal costs. There is no additional cost associated with carrying more than one person. And yet, each person receives a full bill as if they were alone in the ambulance. So I want to ask the minister again, why is that fair, and what is the minister going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the fees are not based on the cost per trip. They're based on the cost of the system as a whole, and how, and even though we do charge a fee, it still doesn't cover the whole cost. The costs are still subsidized. So that is how the policy operates. And I know the member opposite does not think that is right, that the costs should be based per trip. But the fees are only represent about 10% of the cost of the system. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Chairman, the minister knows very well that that's completely beside the point, and I'm disappointed to hear her read from the same briefing notes that the previous minister was reading from. Now, talking to the previous minister about this issue was like talking to a very thick concrete wall, and I was really hoping for something better out of this minister, and I'm disappointed that her initial answers to this are exactly the same as the previous minister. One of the other situations where the policy can be unfair is in some motor vehicle cases where the bill is the full amount, now $600, whereas if a motor vehicle is not involved, it's $105. Now, the theory of this is it gets passed on through the insurance company, and it's not really the individual who pays. And what the government refused to understand, and what the previous minister refused to acknowledge, even though the Insurance Bureau of Canada acknowledges it, is that the theory is wrong, because when you submit one of these ambulance bills to your insurer, your premium can go up. Does go up. Now, it doesn't go up for everybody. It only goes up for the very best drivers. We're not talking about uninsured or underinsured drivers, as the previous minister tried to mislead people into believing one day. We're talking about Nova Scotia's very best drivers. Now, the IBC tries to split hairs. The IBC tries to split hairs and say, well, it's not really the premium that's going up. What you're losing is your good driver discount. Although to the person who receives the bill, it's all the same thing. All they see is the price going up. And for some people, if they submit the ambulance bill to their insurer, the amount they pay to their insurance company will go up by more. That is a fact. It is a fact. It can't be denied. It happens. That's real. And I don't care what the minister's briefing note says. That is the way it really works out there in the real world. So my question to the minister, why is that fair that somebody should get a $600 bill, and what is the minister going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the reason the previous minister and I are sounding the same on this is because the department feels very strongly that the system it has in place is fair. And what may seem like splitting hairs in terms of possibly insurance premiums going up would be precisely what the member alluded to, and that is it's not the ambulance bill itself that is causing a premium to perhaps go up. It would be the fact that the person was in a car accident perhaps causing the premium to go up. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Chairman, maybe the crowd on that side won't really understand how the ambulance fee system works until it affects somebody they know. Because the minister's version of how the system works is simply detached from reality. It is simply detached from reality. So let me ask about another situation. In the workers' compensation system, if a worker is hurt on the job, the province bills $600 because they believe incorrectly that that bill is picked up by the Workers' Compensation Board. It is not. Under the Workers' Compensation Act, the ambulance that takes an injured worker from the workplace to the hospital is the responsibility of the employer. It's right there in the Workers' Compensation Act. And yet they still get the $600 bill, which is the bill that the province sends out on the assumption that it's being picked up by an insurer. Now, a $600 bill to a small employer is a big deal. Now, they know and they'll acknowledge and they'll accept that they have to pay the lower fee, the $105. That's fine, they'll pick that up. But they do not understand why they have to pay the $600 bill when there is no insurer to pick it up. So my question to the minister is, why is that fair, and what is the minister going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I'll have to get back to the honourable member on that particular aspect of ambulance fees. That is not something that I have at my fingertips. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another way in which the ambulance fee policy can be unfair is to people who are not Canadian citizens but are here awaiting the receipt of their permanent resident status. And these people have come to Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia is their home. They're not going anywhere else. They don't have a home anywhere else. Their home and their families are here, particularly in the cases, Mr. Chairman, where, say, an aged parent has come to join a family member who's already here. And so the family is well established, and maybe the parent has come from the country of origin to live here, and everybody knows they're going to get their permanent residence status. They just don't have it yet. And what happens is, instead of being billed $105 like everybody else, they get billed $750, or is it even $800 now? The bills have gone up. I've lost track of where they used to be $750. They're probably, if I know and love this government the way I do, it's probably $900 by now, since their bill was typically 150% of what a Nova Scotian would pay. So my question to the minister, for those people who are awaiting their citizenship or their residency, and yet they're billed as if they like any other tourist coming from another country, why is that fair, and what is the minister going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that with an ambulance fee or a hospital charge for a person in that situation, that once they get their card or their immigration card or their hospital card, that the fee would be waived or returned once the proof is there that they are in fact going to be staying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Fairview.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if that's the policy, the department does an awfully bad job of telling people that that's their policy. I have to tell you, to say that here's the bill, but if you do this, this, and this, and show us this, this, and that, then we'll waive it. is all very well, but the only thing that comes through the mailbox is the bill. And so the least of the department's issues here in dealing with ambulance fees is the way they communicate with the public about what their options are. And if that's the department's policy, maybe, just maybe, they might want to think about revising it so that the person never gets the $750 bill in the first place. The same thing happens to people who move to Nova Scotia from other provinces. This particularly happens with students. Heck, I was a student. That's why I came to Nova Scotia. I came here and I stayed. And there's lots of other people who do that. There's lots of other people who move to Nova Scotia for all kinds of reasons, but they have to live here a certain length of time before they qualify for a Nova Scotia health card. And they can be here, and this can be their home, and it can be where they intend to stay, but if they don't have that magic Nova Scotia health card, then they get billed the out-of-province rate, even if their home province or their former home province refuses to pay, which happens quite often. Now, my understanding is the department sends these bills on the theory that the other province will pay. The problem is they don't. Not always. I would say even frequently the other province won't pay. Or at the very least there's a dispute over whether they will or they won't. And yet these are Nova Scotians living in Nova Scotia, intending to stay in Nova Scotia, and yet they get billed as if they were strangers, as if they get the same bill as if they were a tourist. So my question to the minister, why is that fair, and what is the minister going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, certainly, Mr. Chair, the system is set up to be fair. The system is set up, presuming we honor other provinces' health cards, that they will pay fees for their residents here in Nova Scotia. There may be situations. I'm sure there are situations, perhaps, where there's a dispute over whether or not another province will pay. But anyone who objects to an ambulance bill can avail him or herself of the appeal process and appeal that bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Chairman, what the minister is saying is simply divorced from reality. It's simply divorced from reality, and I don't know who's in charge over in that department, but I will say this about the ambulance fee policy. Whoever is administering that policy does not understand how it works in the real world. What the province has done is put Nova Scotians in between themselves and other provinces. And what should be happening is there should be an interprovincial agreement on paying ambulance fees for each other's residents. But because the government isn't doing that, they put their citizens in the middle. And it's the citizens who get the high bills. It's the citizens who have to fight with the other provinces. And let me tell the minister something, Mr. Chairman. There are many cases where the other province won't pay, refuses to pay, won't pay the full amount. But it's the citizen of Nova Scotia who is fighting with that other province, and that should be a matter between health officials in the different departments. They should not have the citizen in the middle. And that's a good example of what I was talking about the burden of this issue falling on the wrong people. Now, another category, and the last one I'm going to raise with the minister, is people who simply don't have the money. They simply don't have the money. The typical case that I've heard of will be somebody who has a disability, who has no income other than their disability income, but they have an illness that requires them as a medical necessity to take an ambulance. I was talking to a young woman from Antigonish, who I think is probably well known to the member for Antigonish, if not to the minister. And she has epilepsy. And her epilepsy requires her to take the ambulance frequently. She's very well known to the paramedics in town. They know her situation, and they treat her very well. The problem is that she gets bills that she can't afford, even though when she has one of her seizures, she has no choice but to take an ambulance. It's the only option available to her. It's part of her life. It's part of who she is, that she has this medical condition that requires her to call on paramedics frequently. She showed me a list of her bills, and in a 2-year period, she had taken the ambulance 10 times. 10 times in 2 years. It's part of who she is and part of the condition that she has. And she's on a disability income, and the only reason that she can afford to live is that she lives in a heavily subsidized housing unit. And needless to say, she doesn't have the money to pay for an ambulance. She doesn't have the money to pay $5, never mind $105 every time she has to take an ambulance. And yet there is no provision in the ambulance fee policy for her and people like her who need an ambulance as a medical necessity but can't afford to pay. The bills will not be forgiven. They owe the money, and it goes on their credit record that they owe the money, and it's with them forever, so that not only does epilepsy become part of their life, but so does having a bad credit rating, because they have all these outstanding bills that they can't possibly pay. And every so often they'll get a collection letter and a collection call saying, hey, when are you going to pay? And the answer, of course, is, well, never, because my income hasn't gone up. So my question to the minister, for those people who out of medical necessity, because of a permanent medical condition, regularly need to take ambulances, those people are getting billed, and there's no provision in the policy for forgiveness for people who don't have the money. My question to the minister, why is that fair, and what is the minister going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know that in some cases of hardship, arrangements are made to pay over time. I know there are incidents where bills have been forgiven because of hardship cases. But the member's right, there is no provision per se for people who simply can't afford to pay, except through the appeal process, when sometimes it does happen. That is possibly something that we could look at altering. In terms of the hospital bills being paid by students or people from other provinces, what we can do, what we haven't done because ambulances aren't covered under the Canada Health Act, but there is an interprovincial committee on hospital bills that looks at those kinds of issues as far as hospitals go, and we can undertake to talk to this committee about ambulance fees and how other provinces treat us, how we should treat people from other provinces, to see if we can get something worked out there that perhaps would end all the disputes that apparently take place over these kinds of ambulance issues for out-of-province people. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, whenever I hear the minister talk about the appeal process, I have to say, but there's a problem with that. The appeal process is designed to determine whether the policy has been properly applied or not. And occasionally it isn't. That's life. No big deal. People can appeal and win. But it doesn't do one solitary thing for people who get an unfair bill because the policy is unfair. The appeal system is not empowered to change the policy. And that's why I keep raising it here in the legislature, because this is a policy issue. The issues I've raised today are not amenable to appeal because there's nothing, the policy has been properly applied. So of course they're going to lose their appeal. Many of them have appealed, and they lost because the policy was properly applied. The problem is the policy itself. And I'm going to keep going after this issue until the government changes the policy, because in some cases it can be dramatically unfair.
Can't wait for your estimate.
So now, as the minister knows, with my assistance, 7 Nova Scotia families have refused to pay their bills. They announced in March of last year, and they announced publicly, no, actually 6 of them announced publicly, and 1 just last week, and a new one last week, but that's another story for another day. I'd love to tell that story. That was a Glace Bay case, as a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman. A case from Glace Bay. I should tell you about it someday. But the government, on those 6 cases that announced publicly last year that they were going to refuse to pay their bills, have had the government essentially give up on collection. And apparently that's all it takes. And I have resisted the urge to say publicly that all anyone has to do if they don't think their ambulance bill is fair is refuse to pay it. And after a call or two and a letter or two, the collection effort will just evaporate. I've resisted that call because I don't think it's fair to those people. I don't think it's fair to the Department of Health. I don't think it's fair to the system. But if that's what it's going to take to get the department to change its policy, that's what I'll do. It will wreak havoc in the system. If I say to people, if you don't want to pay your bill, just don't pay it. Because what's happened in those 7 cases I brought to the department's attention is they have given up collection efforts. And yet they can't bring themselves to admit the policy is unfair. They just haven't done anything to collect the money. Now we've got a problem here, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to keep after this issue until the government recognizes that. Now with that, I'm going to turn my time over to the member for Sackville-Cobequid, who has just come back from an announcement of some importance in his constituency.
A new announcement?
The member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank my colleague from Halifax Fairview who was raising some extremely important questions with the Minister for sharing some of his time with me, Mr. Speaker. And as my colleague pointed out, I just came back from the constituency of Sackville, which I'm very honored to have had the opportunity to represent, where the Premier was out making an announcement, Mr. Chair. And I have to say, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, the Premier looked quite well. He looked fine. He had a lovely election platform drop behind him. It was all up very nicely, and it looked tickety-boo and fine. The would-be Tory candidates were there in full force. And, Mr. Chair, I have to say that I quite enjoyed myself. I always love hearing good news, no matter how many times I hear the same good news, Mr. Chair. My question, though, through you, Mr. Chair, because I'd spoken to the Minister about this topic a little bit earlier, did the Minister herself and her department have any real direct involvement in the crafting of the announcement, or was that all done by the propaganda ministry?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure which propaganda ministry the member is referring to. We certainly supplied costs, and details, but to the best of my knowledge, we didn't design the press release and the backdrop or whatever else went along with the announcement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And the Minister said, I don't know which of the propaganda ministries you're referring to, and that's, of course, one of the other problems with the government is that they've got so many, and that issue was already raised by my colleagues in question period, pointing out how the various government departments, ministers herself, of course, and the premiers and other ministers have substantially increased the amount of money that is being put on the positive PR flax that have been hired rather than putting that money into programs and services. But as I said, Mr. Chair, I very much, and I said this to the media, I'm very much welcomed hearing the announcement today. I enjoyed hearing it before and all that, Mr. Chair. In fact, I will say, in all honesty, I enjoyed hearing it the first time, honestly, being made by the member from Dartmouth East when he was Minister of Health and came out and announced that we were going to be getting a new Copaca Multi-Service Centre, Mr. Chair. I know that the member for Bedford Fall River was out there too, smiling and wanting to be caught in the the camera lenses, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, being associated with an announcement. And as I say, it's a great announcement as far as it went. But I have the announcements, and the Minister of Health said that she hadn't, they provided certain information to the Premier and the Premier's, I won't call them propaganda team, I'll just simply say information people, those who craft the words, Mr. Chair. But I'm just wondering, had it ever been announced before that the number of beds in the emergency department would increase from the current level of 12 to a higher level of 24? Had that ever been announced before?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, staff tell me that functional planning has just been recently completed and that that announcement had not been made before. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to have the functional assessment may have just been completed, but it was actually completed before. You had to have your functional design work completed before you could send it out to the architects, because the architects have to do their design based on what the functions are going to be. And could I ask the Minister, before I go into a few of the other things that I seem to remember having heard before, Mr. Chair, I wonder if the Minister could tell us if the architects have concluded their work.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the architects have not completed their work. The functional plan will allow them to complete their work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Sackville-Cobequid.
That's interesting, Mr. Chair, because, of course, one of the things, and this is what I saw new for the first time. This is the first thing that I saw out there that seemed to be new. We have a nice conceptual plan, what the building is going to look like, and we have architectural drawings of the floor plan. So, you know what the floor plans are like. Obviously, you must have some idea what that floor space is going to be used for in terms of services.
The member, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, we do know in general, but in terms of architectural plans for, functional plans for all the details of the wiring and so on and so forth, those have not been done. But yes, we have obviously an idea of the program space and the floor plan and so on. But the very detailed drawings have not been done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And where I'm coming from in this is, I'm sorry if I'm a little bit cynical. And I'm told by an equal cynic from another caucus, Mr. Chair, that I am. That having been said, Mr. Chair, what I find, and what I honestly, and I said this to people out there, and I've actually said it to the media as well, what I find extremely disappointing, that will be the term I'll use. I could have used a stronger term, but which I find extremely disappointing. Mr. Chair, the things that I see in here, the things that are being promised for the Cobequid Community Health Centre are things that were basically announced before, not where in the physical structure they're going to sit. We knew that the architects have been appointed and that the architectural drawings should be completed by now. What I find extremely disappointing is that here we are on the eve of an election. On the very eve of an election. And all we seem to get today, and I'm encouraged, I'm pleased that it was said. I'm pleased that there is a recommitment, a reaffirmation that this center is going to be built. But, Mr. Chair, I would have expected, at least even on the eve of the election, when the government has had so much time, that we would have been, or the government and that the Premier would have brought forward even more positive news. Not just that we're going to still do what we said before we were going to do so that we can have my picture taken in front of a backdrop saying that, and hopefully get some positive media coverage tomorrow and hopefully gain a few more votes. I would have expected that the Premier would have made an announcement as to the actual call or a date when the tenders for the construction were to be issued. We didn't hear that, Mr. Chair. Now, I'm sure that your predecessor was forced by the Minister of Finance to have withdrawn